One of my favorite quotes is that if regulation is working well, most normal consumers don't feel it. They may hear a news story once in a while, maybe a little more than once in a while, of a big enforcement case and a huge amount of money that was seized, or a really large fine for fraud or something.
Yeah.
But overall, the day-to-day, the market participants, which will be virtual asset service providers, should be behaving pretty well.
Right.
I think there's a big misunderstanding of what CBDC represents. The way Bitcoin came about, it was very much against the system. And the idea that central banks would want to issue CBDC for many people is seen as that should not, or this is what we're supposed to walk away with. If you think that you don't need CBDC, it's like saying you don't need the currency, that you don't think your country should have its own currency.
Hi there, welcome once again to the Africa Discourse channel, where we bring the voices of impacts that shape in the future of this economy. Now, we're going to be talking to individuals, extensively within the digital asset ecosystem, blockchain, and sandbox. I don't know what these things are. Hopefully, they get to explain to us so we get to understand. But we're going to dive deeper into how innovation, how policy is shaping innovation. Is it how policy is shaping innovation, or how innovation enables policy, whichever that is? And I think I'm going to begin with a premise, right? Innovation thrives where policy enables it, and we also need government to sustain that, because, of course, government ensure the safety net for individuals and people as well, and just take away the risks, right, for adoption. Jill and Carmelle, right? I got the name right?
Yes.
Would briefly give us a background about themselves, and then we can zoom directly into conversation. Hi, Jill. Welcome. Thanks for joining us here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Carmelle. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to begin with you shortly. Could you give us a background about you, what you do, and how you found yourself in this space?
Sure. So my name is Carmelle Cadet. I'm the founder and CEO of MTech. And MTech is a technology company building and innovating in the central banking space.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll dive into that. But essentially, there are central banks around the world, and they have very old technologies. And they have a mandate to protect consumers, and they don't have the right tools to do that. So we help them do that in fintech era of blockchain and AI and so on.
Right. Jill, I almost mixed your name up. Sorry. Yeah. I know you work in policy, but I also understand you work with MTech. So what do you do? What's your background?
Sure. That's a great question, because I do not have a traditional trajectory at all in my career. The one consistent thing has been emerging markets, and especially African markets. I've been working across sub-Saharan Africa for 15 years, probably more, but I'm not going to say it's more. And I started my career really working in digital development, ICT, we called it then.
Yeah.
Oh, I just gave away how. And I would say my work was really born in the era of the launch of mobile money. So I was working in Uganda on using digital tools for rural extension when mobile money was being launched in Uganda. It had already been launched in Kenya. And so I would describe my career as really being born in that time. And I continued to work more and more in digital finance. And over time, I moved from the product side to really the business model side. And that led me to wanting to understand what is meant when fintechs say, oh, over in that country, it's just not a very enabling environment for fintech. And I wanted to understand that more. What do they mean by that? And so over a few years, I really became a fintech regulatory nerd. And once you do that, the best place to go is to go work at the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance, where I worked for a few years. And one of the reasons that I went to work there was I really wanted to work more closely on digital assets in general. I probably knew that my area would really be the regulation of digital assets in emerging markets. but I didn't want to mine Bitcoin or trade Bitcoin. There were very few opportunities at that time.
Yeah.
And so after some years there, Carmelle and I started a conversation about maybe being an advisor at MTech.
Yeah.
And I started spending way too much time thinking about my advisory role.
Colonize you, I guess.
We're able to come together and find the right role for me.
Awesome. That's interesting. Very happy you spoke about, she spoke rather about providing the tools and infrastructure for central banks to become better. And you spoke about regulation, right? And just a question popped up in my head. Innovation against regulation, right? Do the central banks or the regulators do they have technology enough to help regulate the new innovations that we see?
Not yet.
So what gaps currently exist and how can we fill in those gaps?
So I'll tell you what our journey is to that path.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we do. So regulators naturally are conservative, risk-averse, right? Their job is to maintain stability,
Right.
not for things to go up, 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 or down, down, down. It's supposed to stay stable, whether it's the currency, whether it's the fraud in the system, right? Making sure that inflation, unemployment, and so on. So fast forward to now, you're seeing a lot of tech-enabled innovation that is very different from
what they're
used to. And a lot of central bankers and regulators are policymakers, economists, lawyers, right? Not particularly understanding or becoming masters at tech. So over the past 6 to 5 years, what we saw was Bitcoin was just a shock in the system for that.
Destabilize everything.
It destabilized what they knew they understood.
Yeah.
Everybody thought they understood. Right? And how is this thing possible without anybody running it? You can't call anyone, you can't touch it, but we see it.
Yeah.
And you feel it. And regulators struggled with that. I think the second shock in the system was when the most adopted social media platform thought about introducing their own version of currency. That was Meta at the time, that was Facebook at the time. But you've seen now a journey of, okay, this is happening. People want this, right?
Yeah.
Consumers are adopting it. There's nothing we can do about it. I think that was the last thing that they wanted to see. Is this thing real?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is this real? And ultimately, the consumer decides. And as a regulator, if your job is to protect the consumer, you have to understand consumer demands.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing now. And that was, the bet was that regulation, rules, compliance, and even central bank money was going to be important in maintaining trust in financial system, which is what it all relies on.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have that, you lose. You have chaos.
Of course.
And if you don't want chaos, how do you maintain the rules but for it to evolve with the new age of technology-enabled innovation so consumers can be safe even in that new age?
Talking about the trust, and trust is the currency of adoption, right? I'm just going to come to you because you ended on rules.
I never heard that before.
Well, I mean, if people,
the currency of adoption.
if people don't trust something, they can't buy in, they can't lean in.
And institutions.
Right. So you spoke about rules. I'm just going to ask Jill, right? With extensive working knowledge, right? Why do we need fresh rules to manage crypto digital assets and not just old banking?
Fresh rules?
Yes, new rules that we are creating now. Why do we need regulation?
Sure. So, two different questions.
Well,
So, the easy one is why do we need regulation?
Yeah.
The more nuanced one is why do we need, you said new rules, I'll say fit for purpose regulatory frameworks.
Yes.
Yeah, it's my job.
Yeah.
So virtual assets or digital assets, depending on what term you want to use, by their nature, the business models around them can not fit very well into current regulatory frameworks. And I don't want to divert attention from this podcast today. There are a number of reasons for that, and some of that has to do with their programmability, with their decentralization, but also the business models themselves. You often have providers operating many different types of services and offering different types of services.
Yeah.
Because of the global nature, they're doing things across borders.
Yeah.
And because of that, and a lot of the things Carmelle just spoke to about risk management, it is important to have a comprehensive regulatory framework for virtual assets. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't some virtual asset products that will fall under current regulations. And there are many regulators that do this, but it needs to be defined. So if there's nothing that, nothing issued by the regulator or no law or legislation on virtual assets, it's not defined how they operate in the market. There's no accountability, and there are no licenses to be obtained, and thus providers cannot be licensed. If they can't be licensed, then their consumers remain very unprotected. So I could then... One day I could put $500 on an app, an exchange, and the next day, if that app doesn't open, if that's an unlicensed provider, that's it. Gone.
Risk.
Like that money is completely gone. I have no recourse. There's no enforcement. So I wanted to say that because I imagine a lot of people listening may be thinking, why is this relevant to me? Talking about regulation. And one of my favorite...
We just want to move assets.
Yeah.
We don't really... Why must we be stifled in moving them?
One of my favorite quotes is that if regulation is working well, most normal consumers don't feel it. They may hear a news story once in a while, maybe a little more than once in a while, of a big enforcement case and a huge amount of money that was seized, or a really large fine for fraud or something. But overall, the day-to-day, the market participants, which will be virtual asset service providers, should be behaving pretty well.
Right. Interesting. That gives me a lot to think about. Right, but I'm just going to come to you. Now, you've worked extensively with central banks, right, across Africa and the African market, I suppose. And Jill, speaking about regulation, we see different regulation in different markets, right? How does this enable builders? And if digital assets cut across borders?
How does that enable builders?
Yes.
So I think there are a lot of opportunities for the builders, especially when you think about traditional finance, that it's very jurisdictional. Digital assets are borderless almost, especially when you think about stable coins, the way they have accelerated. You can find ways to enable stable coin mechanisms without ever talking to someone. The barrier to entry is technical. It's a new rule. It's a new test to meet. It's not whether you know finance. It's whether you know how to code.
Right.
And that is an opportunity in itself, but that's also risk, right? And it's two sides of a coin where, as a regulator, you need to understand that this is the nature of that innovation. And learning about the innovation, learning about the technology, you discover that this is not, it's not like the companies want to go and kind of create new currencies. It's just, that's the technology. That's how it's used, and that's how people can use it. But when you think about setting policies in different jurisdictions for something like that, it's a lot more difficult than traditional finance. And what you can do, the one thing that we're seeing that it comes back to is your currency sovereignty. And therefore, and also the rules that you put in place for your market. But how much can you enforce it? I think we're going to discover that, right? I think there's a bit to discover around how effective regulation is going to be with bad actors, meaning people who don't want to abide by the rules, whether they can be caught, whether they can be held accountable. But I think you're going to see regulators looking at each of their markets and then studying and seeing what are the use cases that are popular in our market, what is our ecosystem wanting to do. For example, I don't think there's a stablecoin issuer in Ghana, but there's a stablecoin issuer in Nigeria, for example, right? So don't be surprised if Bank of Ghana...
On the cases, can the stablecoin issuer in Nigeria come into the Ghanaian market?
They would have to...
These are different regulations now.
That's a great question.
That is a great question. So can you use the Naira stablecoin to settle a Ghana, Nigeria, that's going to be regulation.
Transaction.
And the fact that you don't have a Ghanaian or a SETI stablecoin
In the Ghana.
also tells you something different, right? So maybe the population wants they want more services that the issuers are okay, right? The banks can be the tokenized deposits and the ecosystem is okay with that. Versus Nigeria, you have the eNaira that got tried, and then a company says, we're going to issue a private stablecoin instead to do USDC and Naira.
Maybe you should tell us more about what the failures of the eNairas are. Do you have any knowledge on that?
I have too much knowledge on it.
I think that would be
I
good.
have too many thoughts on that.
I think we'd like to hear that. And then I'll come to you, Joe, because I have a question about how regulation frameworks with different market can enable cross-African trade. When you talk about AFTAC and the
favorite
uses.
So when I talk about the eNaira, so this will be the third conversation I had about the eNaira in the past 2 days, by the way.
Right.
I think there's a big misunderstanding of what CBDC represents. I'll start with that. There's just a big misunderstanding of what CBDC is. The way Bitcoin came about, it was very much against the system. And the idea that central banks would want to issue CBDC for many people is seen as that should not, or this is what we're supposed to walk away with. So what I usually tell people is, if you think that you don't need CBDC, it's like saying you don't need the currency, that you don't think your country should have its own currency.
big statement.
Right. That's a different way, a different lens to look at it from.
Yes. Because what we're talking about is not that central bank doesn't exist. It's not that central bank money doesn't exist. What we're talking about is whether it should be tokenized.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you understand that there's a new rail, a new plumbing being built in a world of digital assets, then the question is, why would you not want central bank money on that rail?
Tokenized, right.
We covered this.
Yeah.
Today in our session.
Oh, right.
We got we almost had some questions on it. It was really, if you believe the future of finance is coming on chain, then you as a commercial bank or a central bank should be thinking about, how do I bring my assets on chain?
Yeah. This is simple as that.
But do we currently see a lot of improvement across central banks in Africa coming on chain? I mean, we see that Ghana is doing well. We've seen a couple of experiences and examples for which they have implemented, I think, with help from your organization, with the sandbox and the likes.
Yes.
But do we see more African central banks be on board and coming on chain?
I'm working on it.
How many can we see? We have 54, 56 African countries?
I think Ghana has a big influencer factor across the continent.
Yeah.
I think the experience with the eNaira scared a few. Kind of, if Nigeria can't figure out who are we,
260 billion people.
right? But to give a little bit more context, it was early, and I don't think we should see the eNaira as a failure.
I think it's a lesson.
It's a lesson, right? They were the first to go in. We worked on the first CBDC, back in 2018.
Yeah.
Ethereum was barely secure at the time. Right, it was a different world. We're in a different space.
Experiential journey, right? As we keep on developing, we keep on learning new lessons that help implementations.
Yes, and the same way solar panel was not always cheap.
Yeah.
Right? Eventually, you tweak, you experience, and then you develop a mechanism that made it widely accessible. I think that's what you're going to see with CBDC.
Interesting. I think we don't have so much time, so we're going to end right now, and I'm going to come to Jill for the final question. How do we see regulatory frameworks across different African markets affecting intra-African trade and settlement?
Affecting intra-African trade.
So we have regulation that are tailored towards different markets, right? And I don't think we build for the African perspective in general as a union, but we build like in silos. So regulation for Ghana, regulation for Rwanda, regulation. I think we had a fintech passporting with Ghana and Rwanda recently. So that's one thing that helps ensure synergy. But how can we improve that over time?
You see me smiling at Carmelle because we are about to publish a piece that I've authored specifically on passporting.
Right.
And let me just speak to that briefly before it will lead into, I hope, broader response to your question, and that is there's creating regulatory frameworks, also agreements among countries, and then there's operationalizing that. And there are...
So it's possible to have agreement in principle, but not effectively operationalized.
I think we've experienced that over and over and over again. Absolutely. And this is where I think the phrase was mentioned earlier, technology enabled or tech enablement. And there are really, really many ways that technology can operationalize these desires to harmonize policy and harmonize regulation more. And they can also help operationalize the implementation of these agreements, of these joint agreements, whether they're bilateral, passporting between two countries, or whether they're multilateral, which would be more like a union that has an aligned or, common regulatory framework. And that's all with individual country jurisdictions maintaining their own authority and sovereignty, right?
Yeah.
It's actually technology tools that enable that can allow a stronger, I'll say maybe a stronger enforce the kind of sovereignty or visualization controls or access controls that regulators would want. Well, with that, I want to lead into what you asked about some of the, I think, like the fragmentation of regulatory frameworks in Africa, and also the ability to enhance more intra-African trade.
Right. Settlement.
So I think that's such an important topic. It's one of my favorites because I've lived and worked in a number of different African countries. And first of all, there's a large amount of informal trade that is not captured. It's only estimated. And second, that informal trade is certainly happening through a lot of cash, but it's still exchanged, right? That still has to move across borders. You still need some kind of exchange rate, even if it's a parallel market. And there's still plenty of intra-Africa trade that happens, I'll say commercially or formally, right? And right now today, the currency that is used to conduct that trade and exchange payments for that goes through almost overwhelmingly the US dollar.
Yeah.
And every time there is a bilateral exchange between two countries, there are two, if not a dozen financial interactions or intermediations that happen just to make that payment go from a Kenyan shilling to a US dollar to a Nigerian Naira. Right.
Maybe back to Ghana.
And every stage, there is money lost with the paid with the intermediation. Yeah. There's efficiency loss, and there's
about foreign exchange.
There's further one more thing here. There's further capital tied up to manage the risks of all of those different interactions.
Right.
Pre-funding and
so there's so much liquidity and capital that can enter the balance sheets and ideally enter the market with the adoption of virtual assets. So that's one, especially assets like stablecoins, tokenized deposits. But then another is with more harmonized regulatory frameworks for these virtual assets that will really help and accelerate that adoption and some of these positive benefits that I've mentioned.
Thank you very much, Jill. Thank you very much, Cadet. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to close the curtain here. But before I let both of them go, I just want to ask this last question. What are your aspirations for Africa?
Oh, what a big question.
Yeah.
I'm not answering that one. Too difficult.
Maybe I can narrow it down a bit.
I can tell you what I think what I would like our role to be. I would like to think that we are an enabler in Africa becoming its best when it comes to building financial market infrastructure.
Right.
I think Africa is so young. A free Ghana is younger than my mom, I like to say. Right? We have so much to go. And my mom is still around, right? We have so much to do. I think there's a next stage of financial market infrastructure that works for Africa that we haven't built yet.
Right.
The legacy system is still what we're on today. And I think digital asset offers an opportunity to do that. So that's why I'm really excited to work with central banks in Africa to kind of build that up.
Africa must leapfrog. Yes.
Yeah.
Truly leapfrog.
Truly leapfrog.
Truly leapfrog. Land on.
You said you were not going to answer the question, so I'm going to ask you a different one.
I just captured what she said.
Okay. In the next, what is next for Africa when you look at the crystal ball?
I charge a lot for my crystal ball.
Okay.
But what I will say is sort of building on what Carmelle mentioned is we here, certainly in all my years working and living across Africa, I would especially work with donors and international agencies. Every other year, there'd be a report or a headline or an initiative, and it would have leapfrog in the title, right? You know, this is Africa's chance to leapfrog. Will Africa leapfrog? And I hit a point where I was so sick of that. And I will say now, that is my wish or my vision, my hope is that we, in terms of the financial infrastructure and the plumbing, Africa truly leapfrogs, lands on that lily pad on the other side.
Thank you so much. This has been the Africa Discourse channel, where we bring about voices of impact shaping the future of Africa. And on this conversation, we've had Jill and Cadet, and they've spoke extensively about digital asset framework and how markets can be protected whilst empowering builders. And we spoke extensively about regulation as well. Thank you very much. If you do have questions, please feel free to put that in the comment section below, and we'll do well to reach out to Cadet and Camille Cadet. Sorry, my bad, and Jill to help provide more clarity, and we'll do very much well to bring them on board to maybe provide clarity on one of our webinar series and the likes. Thank you so much. This has been the Africa Discourse channel, and my name is Richard Joseph. We'll be back on the next one. Cheers. Bye.